I'm joined today by Anthony Curcio, former armored car robber who now speaks to students about choices that they have. Anthony, it's great to have you on. For people who aren't familiar with you, you were released from prison a couple of years ago after serving, I believe it was 5 years of a 6-year term. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
And the crime was that you organized the robbery of an armored car. And for people who may not picture what this is, we're talking about the armored cars that typically pick up big deposits at either retailers or stores and often bring them to banks or move money around. Talk to us about the crime. How'd you get the idea to even do this?
Yeah, I mean, I was an idiot, first of all, and I had been addicted to painkillers and at that time cocaine, and my life was just spinning out of control. I had been flipping properties, homes, remodeling them, fixing them up, selling them for about 4 or 5 years at that point in 2008. And when the economy collapsed, I was desperate and just stupid. And, I'd already been involved in criminal activities for quite some time. And just decided, hey, I'm losing my house. I need to do something. And with having no moral integrity, I mean, it's pretty easy to continue with planning something like that. But yeah, I mean, desperation is what created me to, go to that level of planning that out for
And
sure.
and for a lot of people, they would say, an armored car is not necessarily low-hanging fruit when it comes to getting cash. This is a dangerous situation. The drivers and the cash carriers typically have firearms. Why did you decide that that was the way you were going to try to obtain cash?
I had at that point in 2008, I had been involved in all types of criminal stuff for about a decade, and just like anything progresses, you get better at what you do, I guess I would say. At that point, I was involved with some pretty rough characters. I was a rough character myself, so doing something like that really wasn't too out of the ordinary for me and how I thought at the time. But what happened was, like I said, I was losing everything. My wife and I just had our second daughter, and I started watching this armored car make its deliveries to a Bank of America in Monroe, Washington, and just started taking notes, looking at the blind spots. The one good thing about armored cars, they're armored, but the bad thing about it is, low visibility. So I kind of took advantage of some of that stuff, and I just studied and studied. And, I'm kind of OCD as it is, and really detail oriented. And you put me on, different types of drugs. I mean, that just amplifies it all. But yeah, I started planning it out. Figured I could do this. In order to get close to the actual armored car driver, he would make his deliveries every Tuesday. I would dress up as a landscaper, blue hat, blue shirt, safety goggles, and I'd wear a wig and stuff like that, and just pretend I was picking up trash and whatever it was, pulling weeds. And the more he got comfortable with me, the closer I could get to him. And it was like I was so obvious that he just didn't even see me anymore. And, these guys are pretty timid as it is. I mean, I remember seeing that old couple walk up to him, and, it's like he reaches for his gun kind of. And at that point, after several weeks of him seeing me on the grounds working the parking lot around the bank, he just didn't even know I was there. So when 3 days, I think, before the robbery had happened, I placed an ad on Craigslist, um, looking for placed an ad for people that were looking for work. Yeah, I think it said $28 an hour or something like that, and advised them once I got people responding back to me. It was a city cleanup project that I posted, and they responded back to me saying, "Yeah, I'd like a job." So I told them all to meet at the bank for the first day of work, and it was the same day that I was going to rob the Brinks truck. And so I ended up getting like 16 or 17 of these guys that ended up showing up, and they were just waiting around. But prior to them coming out there, I had advised them to wear, make sure they had a blue shirt, blue hat, and a yellow safety vest. So
So was the idea of this, Anthony, that if you have enough people that are dressed similarly, presumably you might be able to get away in the confusion, and police might focus on people wearing that clothing, and there'd be a bunch of these guys around?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it was just basically I was trying to set up a decoy system for me to, get out of there, and having the police, which were going to show up within 2 minutes, just having a bunch of confusion for them. And, I didn't even think about it at the time. I was selfish. All I thought about was myself. But, I put these guys in danger. When the police showed up, I mean, it so easily could have been, them getting shot at or something. But at that time, I wasn't thinking about that. And so the robbery happens, and the way I escaped was there's this main highway that cuts through the middle of town, and on one side of it's the Bank of America, and on the other side, is other businesses and stuff.
But
But
before we skip ahead to that, just so we don't skip over
yes,
anything, how did you get the money from the guy? I mean, he's carrying a gun. How did you distract him long enough that you could take these bags with $400,000?
yeah. Sorry, I'm bouncing around everywhere. The When he was wheeling in the money, at this point now, the day of the robbery, all these guys show up. Um, I'm I'm already there working, right, or pretending to work, and I have an insecticide sprayer, and I'm just acting like I'm spraying the plants and stuff around the bank. Well, that um, gave me, I guess, the opportunity to wear a ventilator mask and also safety goggles. So if I was, there I was going to be on the ATM camera, and then also a camera that shoots from the entrance of the bank with a wig and all that part of my face being covered. The only thing you're going to see is like right there. So that was my plan with doing that. When the actual guy loaded up his hand truck full of the money, shut the doors, and was pushing the money in the bank, I went up behind him and pepper sprayed him. That forced him to reach for his eyes. And when he reached for his eyes, I mean, that was the reason I used pepper spray, was that if he can't see, most likely he's not going to shoot. And also, I pepper sprayed myself prior to doing this just to make sure that he's not going to be able to reach for his gun. The only thing he's going to be focused on is dealing with his eyes. And I mean, it sucks. It really, I mean, burns your eyes like crazy.
So you
But that also,
pepper spray him, and then with that, as he reaches for his eyes, that's when you grab the money and the escape begins.
yes, yes.
And the escape ended up going all the way to a body of water, at which point you actually hop on an inner tube.
That's correct. So that the little creek or whatever it was that ran underneath the highway that I described earlier. That's where I had the inner tube waiting and like a pulley system set up where I could pull myself and the money down the river quickly. Well, after I sprayed him, I took the bags of money, ran across this smaller street, then threw the money in the inner tube, like one of those ones you pull behind a boat, has the canvas wrapping on it. And so then I hopped in, pulled myself upstream, and I got out about 200 yards, probably, and took off the blue shirt, blue hat, and all the disguise that I was wearing. I was detail freak. Everything was on Velcro, so I just ripped it off, threw it on the ground, and then got into a getaway car that was waiting and took off.
All right. And ultimately, you actually did escape, but because of a homeless man who had noticed you kind of casing the bank months before, the police were able to track you down. Talk about that.
Yeah, so this homeless guy, it was a couple weeks before the robbery happened. I think it was 2 weeks. I was doing a practice run to see how long it would take me to get from the bank across that street and then into the inner tube and then up the 200 yards. Well, it was a hot day, so remember this was a Tuesday that the armored car showed up. So I'm dressed in all this stuff, and I have two layers on. I have the Velcro blue shirt and all that stuff on top, and then I also have the wig and my whole disguise. So I'm like, well, hey, if I'm gonna go do this, I can't be running across the street and have a wig fall off or something crazy. So what I did is I took all that stuff off. I put it behind this dumpster. It was by a grocery store, not even really that close to the bank, and kept it there. Well, so I go and I, do a stopwatch, see how long it takes me, and I come back, maybe 5, 10 minutes later. Well, when I come back to pick up this stuff, I'm driving a car that's registered to me, and I'm not thinking that I'm doing anything wrong. I'm not doing the robbery that day. So it doesn't seem like a big deal to me. So when I go back to pick up this stuff, I get it and I walk back to the car and I drive off. Well, before I took off, there was this mangy looking guy with a dog, like, cardboard sign, all that stuff. He must be the only homeless person in this town. I mean, it's pretty rare to see them there. And, he starts mumbling something to me and I just blow him off. So when I'm sitting in the car though, after I drive off, I'm like, man, what did I do? All this planning, I've been planning this thing for 3 months. And so I started to, weigh the probability of this guy, remembering what I look like, which later on when the police ended up finding him, he wasn't able to identify me in a photo lineup, like a montage or whatever, but he had written down my license plates. So the odds of that is just crazy how this all worked out. But because of him is why I ended up going to prison. Honestly, though, that guy saved my life. The way that I was going, I mean, it was just a matter of time before I would have wound up dead.
All right, so we're going to talk more about that. To remind everybody, we've been speaking with Anthony Curcio. We're going to go to a break on our television and radio program, and we will continue speaking with Anthony about really what led up to this crime, as well as the aftermath. So, Anthony, you talked about how before this crime, you had started to be involved in other types of crime. You were involved with drugs, etc. What ultimately was the catalyst for that even starting? In other words, what happened? At what age did you first start getting involved in criminal activity and drugs?
Yeah, I was just like any other kid. I went through high school. I excelled at sports. I used to drink on the weekends, and then I ended up going to play football at University of Idaho. So wide receiver there. And during my sophomore year, I was returning a punt in practice and got hit just the wrong way, and I ended up tearing my ACL in my knee. This was in probably the year 2000, and I was prescribed Vicodin. Well, at that time, people didn't really know what it was. I mean, Eminem and stuff hadn't even started rapping about it yet. And, I started taking these things just the way that they were prescribed, but pretty quickly, maybe within 2 or 3 weeks, it's like all I wanted to do was take these things. And I ended up latching onto that because here it was, this was my dream, playing football. And, I'm depressed because as a wide receiver, I mean, the whole game's built around speed really for the most part at that level. And, I messed up my leg. So I latched on to the euphoria and the way that these things made me feel. And so at that point, I started going around. I kept getting prescriptions filled from the team doctor. Finally, he cuts me off after like 2 or 3 months when I start taking more and more. And he's like, hey, you should be better by now. And I start going around this small college town, doctor shopping, which is just like going to each doctor saying, oh, my back hurts or my leg hurts. I need something, please. I got these migraines, trying to get pills. And I did that for a while until finally I was labeled as a drug addict. They got their little notes and stuff. And here I was, this once promising athlete, just completely at that point, I had stopped showing up to practice and everything.
Yeah.
All I wanted was these drugs. So I started forging prescriptions. At that point was when I crossed over to like a criminal type behaviors and stuff like that. And then as I would do one thing, hey, I'm doing this, I might as well do this. Oh, I can get, more money this way in order to get more drugs. And that's how it began. And of course, the type of person you are at the time, you're going to hang around with similar people like you. And at that point, I was no longer hanging out with athletes or people that had the same, dream that I had when I was a kid. Now I'm hanging out with, other drug addicts. And as time would go on, like I said before, everything progresses. And I just, it was all about me. I was selfish. I became really, about material things. I had no value. This is years later, even after going into treatment and stuff, no value in who I was. And so the whole material thing and the way, society really puts that into our culture is that unless you have money and stuff, you're not successful. And so I just felt like a failure. And that was my way. Hey, I can be a great criminal. And that's kind of what I latched onto.
So you mentioned a few things to kind of go through so we can fully understand this. You mentioned your wife and second daughter. Did that relationship with your wife last through your 5 years in prison?
Yes. It was rough. I mean, it was really rough. I was At the beginning, I continued to lie to her, about pretty much everything. Um, Even like my real estate investment business, I was involved with some notorious Russian people around the area who actually caught real estate fraud cases later. But she was finding out about different things. I kept lying at first, lying about everything, and finally, I was on the phone with her when I was in Texas, prison in Texas. She's saying, "You're nothing but a liar. You're a piece of blank." And I hung up, or sorry, she hung up on me, and I looked around. It's like, man, I have no money. I have no friends. All the friends I had, there was other people involved in the actual crime. Everyone came forward, guys that I knew forever, you know, been involved criminally with. They were all doing everything they could to, save their own skin, which I understand, I guess now. But I had nothing, is what I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
and I was there with nothing as well. And I didn't want to be. That was kind of like I didn't want to look. 10 years later, I envisioned myself not being with my wife and her telling our girls like, "Hey, your daddy did this and he never had the balls to basically come clean and be honest with me or himself." And so finally from that moment, that was like the turning point for me, like, hey, at least I can get my integrity back. So I ended up telling my wife everything that she wanted to know. Anything she asked me, I told her. And after that point, we didn't talk for like a good 8 months. But I continued writing her letters until finally she started writing back. And it was rough. It was a roller coaster. And there's still things that come up now, even after I've been out of prison for 2 years, that are pretty hard to deal with for sure. I mean, I created so much hell that, it's a lifelong, karma that's coming back.
I imagine that the any time in prison, any 5 years in prison would be difficult. But what were those 5 years like?
Um, the first year was me still hanging, like I was saying, I was still kind of the same character. I was still hanging out with, being Italian. Everything in prison is segregated. I mean, it really is. Blacks are here, whites here, Mexicans here, and you eat together. And then within those races, it's split up into even smaller units. Like Caucasians are going to have different Aryan gangs, and it's really a messed up thing. So I would hang out with Italians, so I didn't have to deal with some of these white supremacist people. And but the problem with that is a lot of these Italians are organized crime guys, and it's just the same stuff goes on, right?
Hmm.
Well, it was I was transferred to another prison right outside of El Paso, and when I was in there, two of the guys that I associated with, I guess you'd say, and found out that there was a child molester in our unit, and they were drunk one night. There's drugs and alcohol in prison too. And they got drunk one night and went up and messed this guy up really bad. He was carted out. And when the prison investigative unit was doing their, trying to figure everything out, the following day, they went to round these two guys that did this up. And it just so happened that I was with them along with two other guys that didn't even know really what was going on. We were all thrown in solitary confinement. And in solitary confinement, was the worst time of my life, but also the time where I really got focused on who I wanted to be, and more importantly, who I didn't want to be no more. But when I was in there, um, 7 months, I was in this thing, no phone calls, no anything. You don't even get books in there. It's just a concrete thing for you to think. And this is El Paso, and this was when I went in there about July. It was 114 degrees outside, and the way the guards were, it was just really a sadistic thing. It's like guards versus inmates. And the way they would control us would be they'd turn on the heat. I mean, it'd be like an oven. You just cook in there and you don't get enough food. It's not like you can be in there and work out or exercise and stuff because you only get just enough to sustain yourself. And that's it.
Hmm.
And the worst part about the shoe, they call it the shoe, is there at night, as soon as the lights went off at 11 o'clock, man, it was like these cockroaches would come out of nowhere and just flood your cell like you wouldn't believe. And the only thing you had was your, orange jumpsuit or a sheet, and you have like a little yoga mat to sleep on top of your steel bunk. So pretty quickly I realized that I got to cover up with this sheet at night so I don't have cockroaches crawling all over me. And in the morning at 6 o'clock when the lights come on, you just lay there and you learn to sleep, without moving. because you don't want any little crease to come up and a cockroach to get in. And in the morning, there's all these shadows on the other side of your sheet, and you literally have to flick them off, go down like that, and wait like a minute or two, and then come out, because otherwise, you're going to see hundreds and hundreds of cockroaches. I mean, it was sadistic.
So ultimately, you get out of prison. You owe $115,000 in restitution. The money you stole has obviously been recovered. You're making payments on this money that you owe. What do you do?
Well, at first, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to get out and speak to kids, go around to schools and stuff like that. It was when I was in the shoe through a connection with a guy named George Jung. He was actually played by Johnny Depp in the movie Blow. I don't know if you've heard of that,
Of
but
course.
yeah, he introduced me to an author, and we ended up writing a book together. Um, so that whole thing was dedicated towards. So the next remainder of my sentence after the shoe was about gearing up for when I got out. So when I got out, the book came out. I did a couple of interviews, which were just a joke. ABC 2020 really was pathetic. What they sold me and my wife on, and then what the show ended up being like. But um, I started going around speaking, at schools, just really really small things, and over 2 years, it's really progressed, and I talk to these kids the way that I wish people would have talked to me. I grew up during the Dare era,
Yeah, so did I. I remember that.
yeah, and it was pretty ineffective, and statistically, looking up some of this stuff on the internet, the more money they pumped into this thing, the more that drug abuse and addiction actually rose. And it's crazy to me that now, they spent $22 billion on this thing, starting in the Reagan era, the war on drugs, and now you can't even get. It's so hard to even get. I have a speech tomorrow at a school in Kirkland, Washington. I had emailed the police chief and some other officers there, seeing if they could volunteer an officer for like 15 minutes to give a dual perspective of the way that they see what drugs are doing to kids and stuff. They refused to come there, and this is 3 requests completely denied. And it's like now they won't even do anything to help. It almost seems like, I mean, this isn't my first time running into this.
Hmm.
It's almost like why help the kids now when we can just arrest them later? I mean, it's just
Yeah, no, I mean, we've talked about that extensively. Last thing I want to ask you about, and we are more or less out of time, is we know that there's such a high recidivism rate when it comes to people serving a sentence, coming out of prison, and then finding themselves back in. What do you think was the difference between the path you chose and what happens with so many others? In other words, there must have been some reason why you were able to have this kind of wake-up call realization, and so many people either don't or are merely unable to make changes that don't land them back in prison. So was there anything you could put your finger on that was different that you observed?
um, the main difference, I guess, is that I do have. I love my wife and I love my kids, and the fact that I'm given a second chance from them, and I also have an extreme passion. I know that after going through some of this stuff, I know that our time here, my time, everyone's time, is limited, and it's like I started to look at how I want to be remembered when I die. And I've done so much to take from everybody, all selfish, that I want to do some good, and I want to help some of these kids not make the same choices that I made. So that passion is one thing that keeps me going. I'm not motivated anymore by money or material stuff or fitting into society's image of success. And I think it's pretty hard when criminals come out or convicts come out, because it isn't easy for them to get a good job at all. Construction, that's pretty much the main field for them. And they possibly start looking at some of the people around them that are doing so well doing other stuff, which they don't really have those opportunities unless they're to make their own. And eventually that laziness and need to get to the top quick is what will lead them back into prison.
We've been speaking with Anthony Curcio. Thanks so much for telling us your story, Anthony.
Yeah, hey, thank you. I appreciate it, man.